What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another video talking some Detroit Lions, and today we're here with a little bit of a deeper dive into this Jeff Okudah trade, really making sense of this trade. We did a video sort of like this with Teddy Bridgewater. This one's going to be less about the film of Jeff Okudah from this past season because the trade has already happened. Like, there's no decision to be made. It's already happened. He's no longer a Lion. But instead, just revisiting this trade and really breaking it down, trying to make sense of the decision that the Detroit Lions made here. So let's get it started.
The Detroit Lions select Jameson Roman, Josh Pascal, Kirby Joseph, Rodriguez, James Mitchell, James Houston. NFL draft is now officially open.
Welcome everybody to our video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we are back with the Lions video, man. And this is just something that ever since the trade happened, I know we put out the news and the alert that it happened. It was kind of just sticking with me. Like, I wanted to talk a little bit more about this, just give some more thoughts on this situation with Jeff Okudah, maybe break some more things down about the situation and maybe the thinking here of Brad Holmes. Again, I'm not going to dive as much into his 2021 film. Main reason is that we actually did a video early in the offseason breaking down the cornerback positional group, and Jeff Okudah was in that. We had a pretty good breakdown there for Jeff Okudah, and I gave my thoughts. I spoke on his fifth-year option, even though I think at the time I said I was actually considering picking up the fifth-year option. Looking back, I'm like, no, that's not the move. Especially in today's video, I'll acknowledge that was not the move for the Detroit Lions. But we broke it down in that video, talking about how Jeff Okudah played this past season. We'll touch on a few things here because for Okudah, again, it was the first season of him being really healthy for the Lions, and I thought that was just a huge step for him in general. I thought he shot a lot more consistency during the season, but as I brought up in my past video, he was a guy that would get rotated in and out, not Jerry Jacobs, right? We keep that in mind. We keep in mind that he did have a couple of rough games, but he also had some really nice games as well. Like, it was a really good step in the right direction, and I wish he could have had multiple seasons fully healthy to just see where it takes him. But based on where his contract is at, him only having 1 year left on his deal, the fifth-year option would have been extremely expensive, and we'll touch on that. It seems like it wouldn't have made any sense for the Lions to even consider that. So this just feels like it almost, in a sense, kind of just ran out of time. I do think that there's a really good chance that he actually has a good career in the NFL, and I'm rooting for him, and I think that could really happen. So I'm hoping for the best for Jeff Okudah. But with us, unfortunately, it almost just feels like, man, he just wasn't able to be healthy for enough time to maybe put it all together. But maybe elsewhere that's the case. But for our timeline, this move seems to make sense. So with that being said, let's dive into the situation. Let's start out the basics here. Let's talk contract with Jeff Okudah. So what actually went down financially, right? Where is the money going with this? So according to Spotrac, and I'm using their numbers for this, the Detroit Lions were originally on the books for, I believe, about $10.6 million of a cap hit for Jeff Okudah this upcoming season. Now, a potential fifth-year option would have been looking at over $11 million for next year. Now, if you're wondering why that cap hit's so high, that's just how it's set on the rookie deal. They always continue to grow. He was the third pick in the draft, so he was picked pretty high, which means that his contract's a little bit higher, but those things are all set. Like, those aren't things that are like, man, he wanted this much money when he was drafted. Those are just set now. That's just how it's set up, but his cap number was set to be over $10 million. Now, for the Atlanta Falcons, they're not taking on $10 million. According to how I understand it, they're taking on about 3.7, we'll round up, $3.7 million cap hit for Jeff Okudah. If you're wondering how that's even possible, well, a couple things. First off, the Detroit Lions have agreed to pay, again, from my understanding, $1.5 million of the roster bonus here for Jeff Okudah. So $1.5 the Lions are taking on, and I assume this is going to improve the trade return that they actually got. It may have been the reason that Atlanta decided to do that. You have to also keep in mind Atlanta's financial situation. They don't have a ton of cap space, right? They don't have 25 or whatever million that we have. They don't have that. They were sitting at about like 10 million, I think, when that happened. So you have to keep in mind what they had to take on. They also have to pay their draft picks. Like, they need some flexibility. That would have been over 5 million straight on if the Lions didn't really chip in or take any from that. And that's because 4.17 million of his cap number would have been just a signing bonus, which the Detroit Lions have to pay, and then the other 1.01 million to equal the 10.6 million as a whole is the base salary. But the Lions have to pay the signing bonus. It's the roster bonus, and now the base salary that the Atlanta Falcons are going to be paying, and that's how you get to that number, because the Lions are taking on 1.5 million of that. So we know contracts are always a big part of it. It always gets overlooked. A lot of times you just look at the trade. A lot of times financials play into it big time. Now, I think for the Lions side, it's not as much about opening cap space. Even according to Over the Cap, we're in a really good cap situation. You look at Marvin Jones Jr., his cap number is only $2.2 million. So I don't think it's about saving tons of cap space for the Lions right now. That's not necessarily why you do this. I think it's actually more so for getting a return now and understanding that for the future, it's better than almost just basically getting nothing, if that makes any sense. So let's continue to dive through. So that's the financial situation. You got to look at who's on the roster. And this is something that we did a little bit earlier in the offseason. I think this was after some of the signings that we made to the cornerback position. And I put together this little chart, and I was like, man, this is kind of my vision for what the secondary could look like for the Lions. And I remember even doing it at the time. I was like, man, we got a lot of guys here, but this is who's on the roster, so I'm going to put it together. And as you could see, when I put it together, here were some of the names. Obviously, there are some names that are left off of this list. You say Matt McCain is not on this list here, Khalil Dorsey's, but kind of the notable names, the guys that we feel really good about probably making the team, they were on this. And I'm not going to take Jeff Okudah off because I'm trying to illustrate what it actually looks like. And when you see all the names on here and not including those guys that are going to be battling for roster spots, you're looking at it saying, man, there's a lot of names at the cornerback position now for the Lions after that trade. So obviously you can see where I put them. I tried to order them based on stylistically. Chase Lucas and Cam Sutton, more of an off coverage, very smart, intelligent corners, have versatility, right, inside, outside. And then I flip it to the other side. I think you got more of your physical, maybe more of your boundary type corners, right? Your Jeff Okudahs, your Emmanuel Mosley's, your Jerry Jacobs. Now Okudah, of course, have been traded. Okay, but that's 5 players right there. Then you include your slot, Gardner Johnson, Will Harris, who's re-signed on a 1-year deal. So all of a sudden you're looking at this, you're saying that's 7 cornerbacks. Basically having Jeff Okudah after those signings, and if you were to add another cornerback in any draft pick, basically what you would have been doing to yourself at that time is almost guaranteeing you're going to be either cutting one of your draft picks, like a Chase Lucas, who still, even cutting Chase Lucas, you still may have to cut someone else to open up another roster spot, because it looks like the Lions are going to hold 3 quarterbacks this year. If they draft one, I think they're going to hold 3 quarterbacks this year. So you have to keep that in mind too. You only can hold so many players on the actual roster, and obviously injuries come into that, but the numbers there, I mean, you're almost guaranteeing that you're probably going to have to cut maybe multiple players. You don't want to cut the guy you just drafted. You just re-signed Will Harris, right? So if you re-sign him, it's not like you're like, oh, I'm in a hurry to cut that guy. You're not in a hurry to do that. Now for Lions, the cap number is not super high there. Mosley, right? And then also you have to think about what Dan Campbell said at the league meetings, and I thought he made it really sound like those 2 guys were going to start, speaking of Mosley and Gardner Johnson. He was basically saying, like, that doesn't mean they're going to start, right? But he kind of made it sound as if that's the vision, is those guys are probably going to start, but, you know, as they always say, they're going to open the competition and those guys are going to battle for positions. But when you just keep Okudah in that mix, that's a lot. And then if the Lions wanted to draft anybody on top of that, all of a sudden you're looking at it and saying, man, we got way too many guys at the cornerback position. Like, there's just way too many numbers. Even if you go light at safety and you're like, hey, Gardner Johnson can play both, you have way too many corners. And I think the biggest issue on top of that is not just having too many corners. It's when you look at the future outlook. Like, that's something that's always important to take a look at is, okay, where are you sitting at next year, though? Who is under contract? And the issue is Jeff Okudah does not help you for next year, meaning that you have until May 1st to pick up the 5th-year option, which, like I said, is over $11 million. And we're going to hit on the cap numbers here, but basically, to put it in perspective, Cam Sutton was signed to the biggest deal for us, 3-year deal, right? That thing was backloaded. His cap number next season is $12.6 million. It's like the 15th highest cap number for a cornerback next year, right? That's not crazy, but it's pretty high. Jeff Okudah's 5th year would have been over $11 million. His would have been like 18th. Now, those would have changed, but you would have been paying 2 outside cornerbacks. That doesn't really happen a lot. Usually, if you pay a cornerback, you pay 1 cornerback. The other guys are draft picks or they're treatment picks, and, you know, they kind of supplement, and you have, like, your guy. But then you'd be paying 2 cornerbacks, and on top of that, you don't really have, like, a pure number 1 in either of those guys. But the issue is with Jeff Okudah is if you're not going to give him that 5th-year option, none of them help you for next year because none of them are under contract. Mosley's on a 1-year deal. CJ's on a 1-year deal. Jeff has 1 year left on his deal, and you're not going to be picking up that 5th-year option, right? So the only guys you really have under contract still in that entire group is Chase Lucas, the 7th-round pick, and Cam Sutton, who's on a 3-year deal. Outside of that, Will Harris, 1-year deal. Jerry Jacobs only has 1 year left on his deal. I'm not saying these are all going to be super difficult to bring back, maybe, but the point is like, you got a lot of numbers here, and no one's under contract for next season. So that's why I talk about the timeline not matching up. I think it's more important to look beyond what the impact is now. What's the impact next year? If I'm keeping a guy and my vision is that Mosley and Sutton are probably going to get the starting minutes, and then all of a sudden Jeff Okudah is a backup, well, it's not even about like, well, what could Jeff Okudah turn into? Because he's going to be a free agent anyways. He's going to hit the market. And we saw this past year, this past offseason, in terms of guys that hit the market, I mean, I don't know if it'd be a ton for Jeff Okudah. Obviously, just being a former top pick is going to garner interest. Atlanta was interested, and, you know, he's just a top pick, and he's so athletic that there's going to be interest even after the injuries that he's had. So he'd probably get paid at least a solid prove-it deal, maybe like an Emmanuel Mosley, maybe even higher than that because of where he was drafted. Emmanuel Mosley was undrafted. I get he's played well, but he was undrafted. So there's that. Like, Byron Murphy got 2 years, $17.5 million this offseason. Byron Murphy's been solid, but he hasn't been like the guy. That's a pretty good deal. Heck, Mike Hughes got a 1 year, $7 million deal. Mike Hughes. Now, Mike Hughes does have a very clear out after one season, so they could move on after 1 year, but it still is about a $7 million deal. It's also important to keep in mind that as well, that just because maybe he doesn't play as much this year, doesn't mean he's necessarily going to be super cheap on the market. And then if you don't get to see him, why would the Lions be incentivized to bring him back? It's like, well, we didn't see him play, but we need to re-sign this guy. Like, that's going to be a really tough decision to make after the season if he's already a backup. Now, I'll just share this coverage rating graphic, and this is just to kind of put a little perspective, maybe too, without diving into tons of numbers here. Just a different metric to look at. I've used this before, but I do think it is something to keep in mind. First off, Jerry Jacobs, what's division there? He has 1 year left. If you want to see him, keeping Okudah could diminish even more of how much you get to see of that guy, considering he's a free agent next year when you have to decide if you want to re-sign him. But also on top of that for Jerry Jacobs, I do wonder a little bit, and this is one question I have as a whole, about his fit with the Lions. Jerry Jacobs, more of a press corner, and at the time that we brought him in as a UDFA, you had Amani, you had Jeff. We had full of press corners from the previous regime. So I do wonder, and I continue to ask this question, if the Lions will maybe shift a little bit this offseason, do a little bit less press, more off-man. Obviously, that takes a different style of corner. I say Jerry can't play zone and drop, but he is a little bit more of a press corner. And again, that's another point without diving into maybe more of the schematics of it with this Jeff Okudah trade as well. Scheme is very important to cornerbacks, and we've seen that many times. You put a corner in the wrong scheme, he's not going to look the same elsewhere. So keep in mind a guy like Jeff Okudah, if that is the Lions' decision, it makes even more sense because Jeff is a pure press corner coming out of Ohio State. The final thing that I want to hit on here is also the value, right? What kind of value is this pick that the Lions are receiving? And it's really hard to measure that because that could go a lot of different ways. It could be a trade, used in a trade. I mean, it could go a lot of different ways. But pick 159 that we're getting from Atlanta, what value does that bring actually to the Lions? I'm going to do my best to kind of give you guys an idea of what that could mean for the Lions, even though it doesn't maybe seem like a lot on the surface. First off, I know I brought this up before, Stephon Gilmore was traded for a 5th-round pick, okay? And Stephon Gilmore has played well. Now, I think there's certain things that he, you know, there's certain limitations, like you want to play more off with him and things like that at this point in his career. But you know if you put him in that spot, and he's not going to be a long-term guy. But again, Jeff Okudah is a 1 year deal. So it's not like Atlanta's getting him and they're like, man, we got 4 years with this dude. Like, no, his 5th-year option is expensive. So if you want to pick that up, you have to make that decision before you even get to see him play this year. So you're getting pick 159. It's not terrible. If you just look at the trade market and some of the trades that have went down, it's not like usually guys are going for like big time picks. Like this is Madden, right? Guys aren't going for like super high trade value. Like it doesn't happen, especially again, his situation. Okay, now the Lions ate some of the cap space, yes, to make that more enticing, right? But the Lions have that financial flexibility to do it. It's not like the Lions need to open up all this cap space. They're not making this trade again to me to say we need cap space right now. They're making this trade because they're getting something in return versus unlikely getting anything in return. If you just let him play out his contract, you just wouldn't get any kind of return. And we're going to talk more about that. But again, comp picks, right? Well, comp picks are based on also what you do in free agency, even though it's not like a direct, we know how to get comp picks. But the Lions have cap space. The Lions aren't in the situation that they were in year one where they literally couldn't sign anybody. So when Golladay signed a big deal, because they had all that dead cap, when Golladay signed a big deal, it was like the Lions can't really spend any money. So yeah, they're going to get comp picks. The Lions are unlikely to get any kind of good comp pick, of any comp pick, because Lions actually now have money to spend in free agency. They're not in that position. They've gotten out of that dead cap situation. So it's unlikely that you would get a comp pick because, one, Okudah wouldn't be signing probably a huge deal because he's probably not a starter, right? So if that's the case, you're probably not getting a comp pick for the guy through free agency. With the Gilmore trade, that was pick 179. We're actually getting a higher pick here with Stephon Gilmore, with Jeff Okudah than Gilmore, and Gilmore has a much bigger cap hit. Jalen Ramsey. Ramsey went for pick 77, which was a 3rd-round pick, and a tight end that does not play. Now, obviously, that's a better pick than ours, but it's Jalen Ramsey, right? Cap situation played into that. It always does. This was a little side one, but I thought it was interesting. It was a running back, so it's different value. But Jeff Wilson, who was a running back for San Francisco, only went for a 5th-round pick through a trade. And the guy was averaging 5.1 yards per carry, and he had almost 500 yards rushing at the time. He went for a 5th-round pick, right? So that guy was actually balling at that position, and it's position value, of course, but he only went for a 5th-round pick as well. William Jackson, we saw during this past season, dude went for a round 6 pick to Pittsburgh. Now, it was kind of like a rental, but again, the point is like the return, it's not like the Lions are like, man, we got we got done over there, man. We didn't get enough. Like, nah, this is kind of how the picks normally go. Like, this is a normal pick. And again, the fact that we were able to get this has to do with the fact that Lions are willing to eat that. And the Lions are able to do that because financially they've done that. We always talk about flexibility. This is an example of flexibility. If you don't have cap space, you may not be able to take on that 1.5. You may not be able to afford it. So all of a sudden, Atlanta's like, you know what? We'll give you a 7th round pick. It's like, I don't know if I want to do that. So having money entices other teams. So what does the pick 159 actually mean for the Lions, right? What is the value of that pick? And I really wanted to dive into first the draft picks that the Lions have made with Brad Holmes, right? What value have we gotten out of that pick, and give you kind of a more of an overlook of the entire situation. So first off, just going through Brad Holmes' past 2 drafts with the Lions, and I marked them into 3 different categories: hits, misses, and we're still not really sure. A lot of the guys will fall into we're not still really sure, but I try my best to keep them out of that category because they're so young. So I try my best to keep them out of that. But if you just go through the last 2 drafts and Brad Holmes draft picks, here's what I came up with. Your hits. You got 7 hits in the past 2 drafts. That's really good. Like, these guys you just know are going to be really good for the Lions, okay? Maybe they have a specific role, but at this point, I think you could say that they're going to be good for the Lions, right? We'll see. But Aiden Hutchinson, yes. Kirby Joseph, yes. Melk Rodriguez, yes. James Houston, I would say yes. Penei Sewell, yes. Ali McNeil, yes. Amon-Ra St. Brown, yes. That's 7 hits. That's actually a really high percentage if you think about it, because over that time, almost half of the draft picks, it's one less than half the draft picks because it's not a number that Brad Holmes made. So he's almost essentially hitting on about 50% of his picks, where already we feel really good about them. That's kind of insane in the draft, right? That's something to keep in mind. There's only 3 I think you could categorize into misses at this point. Chase Lucas, who's a 7th round pick, and I don't even know if it's fair to say that. I'm just trying to keep it really blanket, but I don't even know if it's really fair to say that. We'll see. This year will tell a lot. Levi, but that's because of injuries, not because he can't play. It's more so because of injuries. And again, Jamar Jefferson. I'll even throw him in that category. I'm a Jefferson guy. I think it's not a miss because you got stuff out of him. He was a 7th round pick, but still, 2 guys are 7th round picks. And then you talk about guys you're not sure on. Jamison Williams. We all expect him to be a hit. Josh Pascal. I think he's going to be a hit. I almost consider putting him in hits, but I won't. Josh Pascal, okay? James Mitchell. We just got to see more. But last season, 11 targets, 11 receptions. That's pretty good. Iffy. I think he's found his role. He's finally, like, they know what they want to use him as, and that's going to be a safety. And Derek Barnes. Even though, again, I think he's found his role in this defense as a round 4 pick. So when you think about the success that we've had in the draft, this is the point that made the Lions have turned this thing around so fast because guys are producing year 1. When you look at it, almost 50% of our picks, I think you can clearly say are hits already at this point in time, which is almost, I mean, that's pretty insane. Now let's just take out the picks that have happened round 5 and later. Melk Rodriguez, that's a hit. James Houston, that's a hit. So 2 of them are hits. You have had 5. 2 of them are clear hits. This is after round 5, all right, round 5 and later. 2 that I would say weren't hits. Again, the same guys, Chase Lucas, Jamar Jefferson, both 7th round picks. And the one guy I would say we don't really know, James Mitchell. That's the point, is that the value, when you're looking at it, the Lions a lot of times are hitting on these guys. Either that or we don't know. And the guys that he missed on are round 7. It's like it's round 7, dude. A lot of times you're just trying to keep him from being an undrafted free agent, so you know you get the guy in round 7. Lions don't even have a round 7 pick this year, which I guess could be exciting because maybe that means they're going to hit on an even higher percentage of their draft picks because they don't even got a round 7 pick. So there's that to keep in mind. Then I think you also have to look at the entire picture of the draft in general. We always talk about premium positions. Just break it down in terms of a 1st round pick. And the reason that I'm doing this is to kind of put it in perspective of the value here. Again, it's important to keep in mind. The 5th round pick doesn't necessarily have to be, okay, you have to draft corner with that 5th round pick to make it make sense. That way, if that 5th round pick pans out, oh, it's a good trade. If it doesn't, it was a bad trade. No, you have to keep in mind of the value of the draft pick, okay, because that 5th round pick doesn't have to be, let's say they keep the 5th round pick, or it could be trade bait as well, but let's say they keep the 5th round pick, right, and you draft a different position. Well, if that guy does well, it actually could still make a ton of sense. Anything that we honestly get out of it would make sense because, again, we're not going to get anything for Jeff. He'll just walk in for agency likely. So, again, that's how I look at it. But then, just looking at it from both sides here, if we take a look at premium positions, now this is according to Over the Cap, they put together this big chart, premium positions, and these are the positions using basically the middle of the 1st round, 16, and the cap number that those guys are going to have, because again, those are all set numbers, and then comparing that to the free agency market and talking about how valuable it is to take that position in the 1st round. Like, is there added value to drafting that position in the 1st round versus finding that in free agency? This is on Over the Cap. You can look it up. It's a pretty nice chart that they put together. Take a look at the positions. that are better to draft according to this over the cap. And this is just really looking at the numbers of it, that are better to draft in round 1 than trying to find it, say, in free agency. And this is mainly because of the cost of it. The positions that pan out more by drafting it in round 1, best value is quarterback number 1. That's a no-brainer because you save so much money if you can hit on a quarterback in first round. So quarterback's number 1. Wide receiver is a clear number 2 at this point in time. That's why the Lions traded up for JMO. Left tackle is number 3, even though tackles are kind of coming together at this point. Left tackle is number 3 because it's really hard. It's difficult to find a left tackle on the free agency market. How often do we go into free agency and say, man, look at that dog left tackle that's just available? Those guys don't become available, right? Those guys don't. Wide receiver. How often do you find hit free agency and there's a really good receiver available that it's like, man, that guy's 27. He's coming off his rookie deal. He's playing well, and it's just like that. It's hard to find that. It rarely happens. One example, Kenny Golladay. How did that work out? It didn't. It almost never works out signing a free agent wide receiver to really any sort of money. Usually, and we've looked at a chart before, almost every free agent that you spend even somewhat decent money on a free agency is a flop. They don't live up to it. Every once in a while you'll get one, but most of the time it does not happen, right? It does not pan out. So wide receivers 2, left tackles 3, edges 4, interior defensive line is 5, and cornerback is 6. Then you get into the positions that would be a negative return in terms of drafting them in the first round. Linebacker, safety, tight end, running back, guard, center, right tackle, right? We know a lot of those positions. And I think the reason to keep that in mind is very important because obviously the Lions have 2 first-round picks. But when you look at trading a guy like Jeff Okudah, first off, back to the point that I made. Cam Sutton's cap number jumps up to $12.68 million next year. That's currently set at 15th in terms of the NFL. $12.68 million. It's difficult to pay that to one corner and then pay another corner big money. So again, the 5th year option for Jeff Okudah wouldn't have made any sense unless maybe he's already proven that he's like that guy. Then you could consider it and you probably would do it, but he hasn't. So you're doing that without having seen it, right? And he also needs to prove that he could stay healthy consistently, right? And this isn't again on Okudah. I like Okudah, but I'm just making a point here. Usually you pay one cornerback and everybody else kind of supports it, or you don't pay any cornerbacks big money. Think of the Patriots, right? They paid Stephon Gilmore. Everyone else kind of a supporting piece. You think of the Rams. They paid Jalen Ramsey. When they did that, they had to get rid of other supporting pieces. Now they're just draft picks and they're cheap free agent signings. The Saints, they made a trade for Janoris Jenkins, but that didn't last long. Why? Because they didn't have any money. They were paying Lattimore, then they started to have to pay Lattimore. Then they get Janoris Jenkins, and it doesn't last long because once they started paying both, they're like, hey, we got to get rid of Jenkins. So now their number 2 is just draft picks, right? We've seen them draft a couple of guys in the mid rounds. It's draft picks. It's cheap free agents. You try to supplement your number 2 and things like that. Try to hide them with cheaper deals and finding those draft picks. So when you look at Lions, who are going to be paying Cam Sutton next year, not saying that they can't pay a free agent cornerback, but a lot of times you don't do that. And Cam Sutton's getting paid a good amount. So the Jeff Okudah thing wouldn't have made a lot of sense. But then you think, okay, that's why it's a possibility in the draft in one of the earlier rounds. And at the same time, I don't think the Lions' Cameron Sutton is a clear number 1, right? For this year, we're good, but next year, you got to look at next year. Okay, look at those other positions. And I'll throw one more chart at you guys. This is something that we've also looked at. Look at what the Detroit Lions' needs are for 2024. Not now, for 2024. Lions don't have a lot of clear immediate needs. The only immediate need to me, the clearest one, is you need a defensive tackle. You could argue tight end, because yeah, you could draft someone and he could become the number 1 tight end. So that's true. You could do that with certain positions. But the clearest need right now, immediate, is that defensive tackle. Because right now it's Bugs. Bugs is your starting defense tackle right now, or Levi, and we don't know what the heck that would look like. So that's your most immediate need. Outside of that, a lot of things, it's like, well, maybe he could be the number 2 here, or it's actually more for the future when you're talking guard. A lot of wide receiver, right? We don't need a wide receiver right now. But for next year, Josh is a free agent, Khalif's a free agent, Cephas, Marvin Jones, a lot of guys become free agents, and that position is now so valuable, it's almost impossible to find out on a free agent market. And then at the same time, that's why the Lions traded up for JMO, and they may draft another one high. But when you look at these needs, think about this for a second. Which ones are most likely to probably be drafted in round 1 by the Lions in their biggest needs? Defensive tackle, 3-tech. That one could definitely happen in round 1. Heck, it could happen at 6. They could move up for it, right? It could happen anywhere in round 1. That could definitely happen, and that's their most pressing need. That one returns a positive value in terms of drafting in the first round. And I'm going to hit on a lot of these other positions, but when you talk about defensive tackle, specifically that 3-tech, just look how difficult it is to find that if you're talking free agency, right? There's a reason that Brad considered trading up for Levi into the first round, because it's so hard to find that spot. If you need that guy that you that can beat the guard, have a two-way go, and consistently cause havoc upfield, it's hard to find. Look at what Payne was extended for. Look at how much Javon Hargrave got as an older defensive tackle. Look at what David Onyemata got as a guy that's still been hit and miss. Like, those guys just don't hit the market. They just don't. If they're good, they just don't hit the market. Otherwise, there's going to be some questions about them. It's just so hard to find that. Does backup this quarterback? Yes, it does, right? We're talking more backup quarterback here, but it does return the highest value. Guards, no, it does not. Taking one around one does not. We're not going to take one around one. We may not even draft one this year, but we could for next year potentially, right? Wide receiver, that one could happen, even though I don't think it, even though I'm not really thinking that it will in round one. I mean, it could if there's someone they fall in love with. First off, this receiver class isn't exactly super top heavy, and also on top of that, again, that could be something that they could look to do more so next year, and then maybe try to hit on another cheap one-year deal. But the point is, that one could happen. Running back, it could happen. If somehow Bijan was there, maybe they consider. I know some of you guys do. I don't think it's likely, though. Like, if you were asking me, is it likely they take Bijan? No. Is it possible? Yeah. I mean, we've seen the Rams draft high running backs before, but it's unlikely if you ask me. And because of that, again, you also see the value of return a first round. It almost doesn't make any sense. However, you also have to keep in mind that if he's just that great, then that's your best argument for it. Edge rusher, that could be a first round pick. It could be your top pick in this year's draft because you need a number 2 unless James becomes that, but more of like a pure 3-down number 2 if you ask me. A cornerback on the outside, that could be a top pick. Both of those return positive value drafting in the first round. Tight end, it does not return positive value. You're unlikely to draft a tight end in round 1. I would think the Lions are unlikely to do that. They didn't do it when Brad Holmes was with LA. They got Everett. They got Higbee in the mid rounds. I think the Lions may draft the tight end pretty high. I was even talking to Red. I was like, that could hit day 2 to me. Early day 2 potentially if the guy's right there. But I think it's unlikely that it happens at 18. Anything can happen, but I think it's unlikely. Kicker won't happen in the first round. Needs here. The Lions have 9 picks in this year's draft. 9. So if we just take a look at his last 2 years, the odds would say that you hit on about 4 of those. Now, also, again, 2 of your misses have been 7th round picks. You don't have any 7th round picks. So maybe like 5 of them. 4 to 5 of these picks, the odds are they're going to be hits. They're going to be clear hits for the Lions. You got 2 of those picks in the first round. They're likely going to go to those premium positions. I mean, they have to, but I think they're likely to go that direction. The reason the 5th round pick is valuable is because that can go to one of the other positions. Later picks that the Lions have made. Melk Rodriguez, James Mitchell. Now that was an edge rusher, but he's a little bit more of kind of like a roll edge rusher at this point. James Mitchell, running back we did with Jefferson. Chase Lucas was corner, but again, neither of those hit, and they're both 7th round picks at this point. So the 5th round pick, what that does, it's not directly to say, wow, we got to replace Jeff Okudah with this pick. It's more so, I think, the ability to now reset and say, okay, we are going to draft premium positions. The Lions have done it the first 2 years. They've drafted premium positions early. Penei Sewell, tackle. That's a premium position. Now, right tackle technically didn't fall in that category, but in today's NFL, it's how often do you find a really good right tackle? So I'm cool with that one, okay? That one you could argue, but I'm cool with that one, right? We know how the dog Penei Sewell is. He's already played left tackle for us anyways, right? This past year, Aiden Hutchinson, that's a premium position. Edge rusher is a premium position. We talked about safety. That's not a premium position at that spot. They trade up for JMO. They did not trade up for Kyle Hamilton. They trade up for a receiver. That's a premium position. Even though it's not the first round, still, even if you move to the 2nd round, both of our 2nd round picks to this point have both been defensive linemen for the Lions, and they have 2 of those picks this year. We can do that because we need more ammo in the back end. We need more ammunition in day 2 and day 3 to hit on those maybe non-premium positions, whether that's the tight ends, whether that's if you want to go get another off-ball linebacker. Maybe it's a potential developmental guard, right? Maybe like a Jordan McFadden type. That's a running back at that point. That's the biggest value here that gets missed. Is it's not about you got to use this pick to replace the guy. It's more so what you're able to do with an extra draft pick, and the success rate that we've had, it's almost undeniable. Like, how can you deny that? We're hitting on such a high rate that we should not have rebuilt this fast, but Brad Holmes done so well. How can you ever argue with giving him more draft picks? And then my final point is just looking at the players. And I use Player Profiler for this because, again, we're not going to go into film or nothing or go a huge breakdown here. But just a quick glance at the stats. You look at the coverage rating that they gave out. If you look at it, Jeff Okudah, who had a plus 12.07 coverage rating, ranked 32nd in the league this past season. Now, obviously, certain games we threw him help, and to his credit, he got the top matchups. It wasn't like Jerry was getting the top matchups game to game. He got him. When it was Jefferson, it was Jeff Okudah. Now, he might got help, but he got him. He got DK Metcalf. Like, he was the guy majority of the time that was getting that top matchup. So, credit to him on the outside. He had to handle those. But if you take a look at the corners that we added here, Cam Sutton ranks 5th in coverage rating in the NFL this past year. Jerry Jacobs ranks 6th in coverage rating. What I say about Jerry, he didn't rotate in and out. When he was out there, he played. And we also have taken a look at the stats of when Jerry Jacobs returned, how the Lions' pass defense went from just what the heck is that to all of a sudden first in completion percentage allowed. They're in the top 10 to touchdown to interception ratio. And you're looking at the stats and you're like, outside of yards per game allowed, the Lions are actually way better against the pass. So it's not just like, well, the whole season was terrible. Like, no, when Jerry returned, a lot of things changed because they had a reliable outside number 2 and he'll compete. We know what CJ is going to be in the nickel for us. So to me, this is more so of a future move. It's not what does this mean for the Lions now? It's what value can we get out of the guy because we have financial ability. We're able to eat some of the contract and make him more interesting for a team looking to take on the deal. But also because a lot of teams at this point in time don't have a lot of money to spend. So you have to be willing to do that to sometimes pull a trade-off. But also it's about, well, what positions can we continue to build? You want to build through the draft? You got to have draft picks. You want to build the draft, you want to move the board, you got to have draft picks, right? That's why the 2 first-round picks have been so valuable. The value, I think, it just makes tons of sense here. If your vision is he's not going to come in as a starter, look, there's expectation. The Lions won 9 games this past year, right? Gardner Johnson signed a 1-year deal to play here. Guys are coming here on prove-it deals, right? Guys are coming here to win. They all saw that primetime game, and when that happens, expectations are there. Lions are favorites to win the North. Lions are top 7 in Super Bowl odds. Like, there's expectations. So do the Lions want to run it back and say, Jeff, look, we're going to give you the keys, and you're going to be the guy this next year, and we'll just have to kind of see what happens? Because you do that, that takes someone's roster spot. One of these guys are probably getting cut. If it doesn't work, then it's like, we're getting nothing for him on the market. We don't want to re-sign him because he didn't play well. Or do you say, okay, let's get something for him now. We've hit on cornerbacks that we really like in free agency, and this is not a guy we drafted on top of that. I think are looking for their Lattimore or looking for their Ramsey, and they'd love to have that. Heck, the Rams didn't even draft Ramsey. They were just trading for guys. They traded for Talib. They traded for Peters. They traded for Ramsey, and that's because guys like that don't become available. It just does not happen. So they were like, oh, he's young, let's do it. And once they started to pay him, now all of a sudden they didn't have number 2 cornerback. With that being said, hopefully that made sense. I don't know if it did. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, for watching. I am wishing Jeff Okudah the best. I'm a Jeff Okudah fan. It's unfortunate that he was not healthy here because I really think he could have became a top dog. I really do. And I hope he does with Atlanta. I hope he becomes, that guy. I know he puts in work, and it's just an awful start for a guy who's been drafted, I think, the highest ever at corner. It's about as bad as it can go, but he's been nothing but great for the Lions off the field. I'm wishing the best for him. I just think it's more of a timeline thing with the Lions. With that being said, thank you, for watching, and I'm out.